Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, February 26, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. Expect a high of 84.1 degrees in Riverside today, with a low dipping to 59.4 degrees, so it's shaping up to be a comfortably warm day with mild evenings. Coming up, we'll examine the reasons behind the FBI's decision to dismiss agents who investigated President Trump's handling of classified documents, and explore how California's proactive power shutoffs to prevent wildfires are severely disrupting operations at public schools across the state. Plus, we'll cover other key developments from around the nation and the world. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We start this half hour with a major shakeup inside the FBI. The Bureau just fired a group of people who worked on the Trump classified documents case. Ethan, walk us through what happened.
Grace, this was one of the biggest internal purges the FBI has seen in modern times. According to the Associated Press, at least 10 career employees, a mix of agents and analysts, were fired yesterday, February 25, 2026. Every one of them had worked on Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation into Donald Trump's handling of secret records at Mar-a-Lago. CBS News adds that none of the people let go were tied to the separate election interference case known inside the Bureau as Arctic Frost. This round was all Mar-a-Lago.
So these are not random staffers. What exactly were these agents and analysts doing on the Mar-a-Lago case?
AP and CBS report they were central to that investigation. They helped track what classified material Trump took when he left the White House in 2021 and how it ended up stored at Mar-a-Lago. They also helped plan and carry out the FBI search of the property and supported the prosecution team that charged Trump with hoarding classified documents and obstructing efforts to get them back. Some of them had become institutional experts on how that case unfolded, which is part of why their removal is getting so much attention.
You called it a purge, not a one-off firing. How does this fit into the broader changes at the FBI under Kash Patel?
Kash Patel, a close Trump ally who became FBI director last year, has been steadily pushing out people tied to investigations of Trump. The AP stories carried by KSAT and Click on Detroit say dozens of Bureau employees have already been forced out, including some who worked on Arctic Frost, the 2020 election interference probe. Time magazine and Bloomberg Law report that Patel has targeted people he and the White House see as, quote, not aligned, end quote, with the administration's agenda. At the Justice Department, Attorney General Pam Bondi and D.C. U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro have backed similar moves against prosecutors who worked with Jack Smith.
There is also this bigger civil service fight hanging over everything. What has the administration done there to make these firings easier?
Legal analysts told Time and Jurist that the administration has revived and expanded a Trump-era idea similar to what was once called Schedule F. Around 50,000 federal workers, including senior FBI officials and Justice Department lawyers, have been moved into a new category labeled Schedule Policy/Career. Bloomberg Law explains that in this category, many people lose traditional civil service protections under the Civil Service Reform Act and can be fired at will instead of only for cause. The White House and Patel now point to that reclassification when they argue they have the legal authority to summarily fire people who worked on Trump cases.
The timing here seems tied to a specific news report about phone records. What did Reuters uncover?
Reuters reported, and AP and CBS picked up, that during the Biden administration, Jack Smith's team obtained phone toll records for Kash Patel himself and for Susie Wiles. Toll records are call metadata, not the content of conversations, but they can show who called whom and when. Reuters and CBS say those subpoenas were part of the Mar-a-Lago classified documents investigation, not Arctic Frost. CBS adds a key detail. Wiles' phone records were actually reviewed in the documents case. For Patel, they could not independently confirm that his records were subpoenaed in that particular probe.
And Patel is now in charge of the FBI. How is he describing those subpoenas?
In his comments to Reuters and summarized by CBS, Patel has been furious. He called the subpoenas for his and Wiles' phone data, quote, outrageous and deeply alarming, end quote, and claims they were obtained on what he calls flimsy pretexts, meaning weak legal justifications. He has also alleged that those records ended up hidden in what are known as prohibited access files inside Sentinel, the FBI's case management system. According to The Guardian and Senate materials described in legal reporting, prohibited access is a high-security designation that makes a file basically invisible to routine searches, which some critics have nicknamed a bureaucratic black hole.
That sounds serious, if true. How much of Patel's story has actually been verified?
That is where the caveats come in. Reuters and CBS both stress that Patel has not produced documentary evidence showing the subpoenas were illegitimate or deliberately buried to dodge oversight. As of this morning, there are no public court rulings, inspector general reports, or special counsel documents that say those subpoenas were improper. Jack Smith's team, in filings and testimony reported by CBS, Time, and others, defends toll record subpoenas as standard investigative tools for piecing together timelines and possible obstruction, and they emphasize that these do not capture what was said on calls. Smith's lawyers also say those phone metadata records were turned over in discovery to Trump's own defense team, which they argue is inconsistent with trying to bury them forever.
So Reuters publishes this story, and then, the same day, these firings happen. How directly is Patel connecting the two?
The coverage from AP, CBS, and Reuters together makes the sequence pretty clear. After internal reviews and media questions revealed that his and Wiles' records had been subpoenaed and, at least in Wiles' case, examined, Patel framed that as proof of political targeting under the Biden Justice Department. Then, yesterday, February 25th, he ordered the immediate firing of at least 10 FBI employees from the Mar-a-Lago team. Publicly, he has argued that those agents and analysts abused their authority and that removing them is necessary to, in his words, restore integrity, even though CBS notes he has not provided evidence that they broke laws or internal rules.
How are rank-and-file agents reacting to that explanation?
The FBI Agents Association, which represents most frontline agents, has come out swinging. In statements quoted by AP and CBS, the group calls the firings unlawful and a violation of the employees' due process rights. They warn that repeated purges like this strip away hard-won expertise, destabilize the workforce, and send a message that taking on sensitive cases involving the president can cost you your career. Their statement even says these moves, quote, put the nation at greater risk, end quote, by weakening both the Bureau's capacity and its independence.
You mentioned this is not the first wave. What has already happened to units tied to the election interference case, Arctic Frost?
Time and Jurist report that agents who worked on Arctic Frost, the Trump 2020 election interference probe, were hit in earlier rounds of firings. A key unit at the Washington field office, known as CR-15, and focused on public corruption, has been described as gutted or effectively disbanded. There are accounts of some agents being fired, briefly reinstated, and then fired again, which the Agents Association calls erratic and arbitrary. All of that has created a sense inside the Bureau that work on Trump-related matters carries unique personal risk.
Legally, though, can the administration do this? What are the main protections that used to exist for these employees?
Traditionally, career FBI agents and Justice Department lawyers were shielded by the Civil Service Reform Act, which generally requires cause and some process before someone gets fired. There are also internal FBI grievance procedures and certain whistleblower protections, including ones Congress strengthened in 2025. Those are supposed to give agents a way to challenge retaliation to the Merit Systems Protection Board, an independent body that hears these kinds of cases. But legal reporting from Bloomberg Law and others says the administration has undercut those protections by reclassifying many senior people as at will under schedule policy/career, and by leaving the Merit Systems Board without a functioning quorum.
And that leads us to this big court fight, Driscoll Jr. versus Patel. Who is suing and what are they claiming?
In that case, now before Judge Gia Cobb in federal court in Washington, the plaintiffs include former acting FBI Deputy Director Brian Driscoll Jr., along with former heads of the Washington and Las Vegas field offices and other senior officials. According to legal filings summarized by jurists and other outlets, they say they were targeted for removal because they refused to participate in political retribution lists, or because they oversaw aspects of the Trump investigations. One of the most explosive allegations is that Patel privately told Driscoll the firings were, quote, likely illegal, end quote, but that his own job depended on removing people who worked on cases involving the president, because, as Patel allegedly said, quote, the FBI tried to put the president in jail and he has not forgotten it, end quote. They are asking the court to declare these purges unlawful, restore them to their positions with back pay, and roll back the reclassification scheme.
How is the administration defending itself in that lawsuit?
The government is leaning heavily on what lawyers call a robust unitary executive theory. In court papers described by Bloomberg Law, they argue the Constitution gives the president broad power to remove executive branch employees, especially those in law enforcement and national security. Their position is that Congress cannot insulate FBI or Justice Department personnel from removal if the president believes they are disloyal or misaligned with his policies. On February 18th, a group of 16 democracy and constitutional scholars filed a friend of the court brief urging Judge Cobb to let the suit proceed, warning that what they call retributive firings mirror democratic backsliding seen in other countries.
Let's zoom back out. What has happened to the underlying Trump cases that triggered all of this?
Both major federal Trump cases are now off the table. The Mar-a-Lago documents case was the first federal criminal indictment of a former president, charging willful retention of national defense information and obstruction. In mid-2024, Judge Aileen Cannon dismissed that case, ruling that Jack Smith had been unlawfully appointed as special counsel, and after Trump won the election, the new Justice Department did not appeal and formally dropped the charges. The Arctic Frost election interference case in Washington was also dismissed at Smith's own request after Trump took office, citing long-standing Justice Department opinions that a sitting president cannot be criminally indicted.
And some of Smith's work remains hidden, right? How does that factor into these current disputes?
Yes, a big piece of the record is sealed. Volume 2 of Smith's final report on the Mar-a-Lago investigation has been permanently blocked from public release by Judge Cannon, who ruled just this month that putting it out would cause, quote, manifest injustice, end quote. That means the detailed rationale for steps like the Wiles and Patel toll subpoenas and other investigative moves is not available for outside scrutiny. So you have Patel asserting abuse and cover-ups, Smith's team insisting they acted by the book, and the most detailed documentation locked away, which only heightens the controversy around yesterday's firings.
With all of that in mind, what are the biggest unanswered questions this morning?
There are a few major ones. First, no independent body has yet concluded that the Wiles or alleged Patel subpoenas were unlawful or based on flimsy pretexts. We still do not know whether the prohibited access designation in Sentinel was misused or just a routine way to protect sensitive files. Second, the FBI has not offered detailed public explanations for why these specific 10 agents and analysts were chosen for termination beyond Patel's broad accusations of abuse. And third, we do not yet know how courts, starting with Driscoll Jr. versus Patel, will rule on the larger question of whether a president can remake the FBI by purging people whose only unifying trait is that they once investigated him.
Bottom line this morning, Ethan, what does this episode say to people inside federal law enforcement?
The message many are hearing, according to CBS and AP sourcing, is that working on politically sensitive cases involving the president can be career-ending even years later. With the Trump prosecutions dismantled, key investigative units hollowed out, and now this new round of firings, the line between legitimate policy change and personal retribution is being hotly contested. Whether the courts step in or Congress reasserts protections will shape how independent the FBI and Justice Department really are in the years ahead. Until then, there is a deep sense of turmoil inside the institutions that are supposed to be insulated from exactly this kind of political payback.
A lot to watch in the weeks ahead. Ethan, thanks for breaking it down for us. Our second story this morning is about California's wildfire prevention blackouts and how they are hitting schools. Reporter Chloe Martinez is with us. Chloe, what exactly is happening in these classrooms when the power goes out?
CalMatters paints a really stark picture from Riverside County, especially around Perris and Moreno Valley. During a windy morning in December 2024, the lights at Orange Vista High in Perris just snap off mid-lesson. According to the CalMatters piece, which U.S. News and World Report reprinted yesterday, teachers are literally cut off mid-sentence, while security cameras, Wi-Fi, and intercoms all die at once. Staff suddenly have to move hundreds of students through darkened hallways, lining them up toward the street while parents race over in chaotic traffic.
And these shutoffs are planned, right? Not random breakdowns. Why are utilities cutting power in the first place?
That is right. They are called Public Safety Power Shutoffs, or PSPS, and they are intentional. Since 2012, the California Public Utilities Commission has allowed big investor-owned utilities like Southern California Edison to de-energize power lines when fire weather gets extreme. The policy really ramped up after the massive fires in 2017 and 2018 and Pacific Gas and Electric's bankruptcy because overhead lines in dry, windy terrain were sparking deadly blazes. Edison's territory includes huge stretches of the Inland Empire, and CalMatters reports that the very circuits crossing Perris and Moreno Valley are among the ones shut off most often.
So it is the fire risk modeling that drives the decision. But how much warning do schools actually get before the lights go out?
On paper, Edison says it tries to give notice 3 days out, again 1 day out, and then same-day alerts. In practice, district leaders tell CalMatters those timelines often fall apart, especially when forecasts shift. Some Riverside County schools reported getting text alerts after the power was already off, or seeing projected shutoff windows that were off by hours. That is what makes it so disruptive for schools trying to decide whether to open, close, or send kids home early.
Walk us through what a PSPS day really looks like on a campus. What changes once that switch is flipped?
First, there is the literal darkness, especially in classrooms without much natural light. Teachers lose projectors, computers, and online tools instantly, and any kind of hybrid or digital lesson just stops. Heating and cooling systems shut down, so within a couple of hours rooms can be stifling or very cold, depending on the season. And as CalMatters notes, safety systems like electronic door locks, PA systems, and security cameras go offline, which really worries principals trying to keep hundreds or thousands of students safe.
It sounds like a real safety and learning problem. How often is this happening to those particular Riverside County districts?
It is concentrated in a cluster of mostly low-income districts. Val Verde Unified, which includes Orange Vista High, told CalMatters that 3 of its campuses lost a combined 13 instructional days in the 2024 to 2025 school year because of wind events and PSPS. Neighboring districts like Perris Elementary, Perris Union High, New View Union, Banning, Beaumont, Jurupa, and San Jacinto also reported full closure days or sharp attendance drops tied to these shutoffs. And remember, Perris Elementary says more than 90% of its students are low income, so these are not communities with backup generators at home.
Losing a dozen or more days sounds like a lot. How does that translate into actual learning loss for students?
Researchers say the damage goes beyond the calendar. CalMatters cites work from groups like the assessment nonprofit NWEA, showing each missed school day can equal about 3.6 days of instructional loss when you add in reteaching and lost momentum. That is especially harmful for kids still trying to recover from pandemic learning gaps. So when Val Verde loses 13 days at some schools, the effective loss is far bigger than a couple of weeks on paper.
Do districts at least avoid the problem by staying open with backup power? Or does that create its own headaches?
Even when they manage to keep a campus open, the day is really fragile. Families may be scared of sending kids out in high winds or smoky air, and social media rumors about potential shutoffs can spook people. Several districts told CalMatters they ended up filing emergency paperwork because attendance tanked on those days, even though buildings technically stayed open. Administrators sometimes find that operating a half-empty school with staff and utilities costs more than closing, yet they still risk losing funding because students were absent.
Beyond academics, we know schools are a lifeline in low-income communities. What happens to that safety net when campuses close or half close?
The ripple effects are huge. In Paris and Moreno Valley, schools are where many kids reliably get breakfast and lunch, so a closure can mean missing their most nutritious meals of the day. Parents working warehouse, logistics, construction, or service jobs often cannot just call out at the last minute, so sudden early dismissals cost them wages or even jobs. And students with disabilities lose scheduled therapies and services, creating backlogs and compliance problems that districts then scramble to fix.
You mentioned funding earlier. California uses something called average daily attendance. How does that system interact with these shutoffs?
This is where CalMatters argues that darkness turns into debt. California does not fund districts strictly on how many students are enrolled, it funds them on how many actually show up each day, the average daily attendance. So if a district closes, or if a school stays open, but lots of families keep kids home because of PSPS, that day can reduce their funding. Superintendents in Riverside County describe it as a double penalty. First, they deal with the blackout, then they get hit financially for absences caused by a utilities decision.
Can districts get any relief from the state when disasters or shutoffs hit like this?
There is a process, but it is not easy. Districts can file something called Form J13A with the California Department of Education, asking to be held harmless for closure days or extreme drops in attendance. At least 8 Riverside County districts, including Val Verde, Paris Elementary, Paris Union High, Newview, Banning, Beaumont, Jurupa, and San Jacinto, have filed these for PSPS and wildfire-related events since December 2024. But CalMatters reports that approval is not guaranteed, the paperwork is heavy, and even when the state says yes, the money arrives with a lag that complicates budgeting.
Lawmakers have been tweaking those emergency rules. What is changing that districts need to know about?
A recent law called Senate Bill 153, passed in 2024, tries to force more planning for instruction during emergencies. Starting this coming July, every district will have to fold an instructional continuity plan into its overall safety plan, spelling out how it will keep teaching during things like PSPS or wildfires. By the 2026 to 2027 school year, the state can deny those J13A waivers if a district does not have an approved continuity plan. The idea, according to legislative summaries CalMatters reviewed, is to move away from simply writing off lost days and toward planned, remote, or alternative instruction.
But if the power is out in entire neighborhoods, can remote learning really work for these families?
That is the tension district leaders are highlighting. In many Paris area neighborhoods, homes do not have backup batteries, stable internet, or even working cell service once devices and towers drain during an extended outage. So you can write a beautiful instructional continuity plan, but if kids are sitting in dark apartments without Wi-Fi or charged laptops, they cannot actually log on. Superintendents told CalMatters they feel the state is demanding continuity without guaranteeing the basic ingredient of electricity.
You talked about darkness and disruption. Let us turn to the utilities argument. Are these shutoffs at least working to prevent fires?
Southern California Edison and state regulators say yes, at least in broad terms. In its wildfire mitigation filings, Edison reports that reportable ignitions in its high fire risk areas dropped from around 50 in 2020 to under 20 in 2023, thanks to a combination of PSPS, faster protective relays, and physical grid upgrades. In a wildfire mitigation plan approved just 2 days ago, on February 24, 2026, Edison claims an 85 to 88% reduction in catastrophic wildfire risk compared with pre-2018 conditions. Regulators at the Public Utilities Commission cite those kinds of numbers when they argue that shutoffs remain necessary until more lines are hardened or buried.
But the benefits they describe are statewide and modeled. How do people in these school communities see that trade-off?
Many local education leaders say the calculus looks very different on the ground. Val Verde and Paris officials told CalMatters that while they understand the need to avoid another campfire-scale disaster, their students are paying a very real price in lost learning, missed meals, and parents losing jobs. They argue that the benefits are spread widely and somewhat theoretical, while the harms are concentrated and immediate in particular neighborhoods that get shut off again and again. It is why some advocates describe these areas as becoming, in effect, sacrifice zones for the rest of the grid.
Are state leaders looking at changing how schools are funded so outages don't hit budgets so hard?
That debate has really intensified. Under a law called Senate Bill 98, the legislature asked its nonpartisan analysts to study shifting from attendance-based funding to enrollment-based funding. The Legislative Analyst's Office reported last month that such a shift would likely cost the state about $6 billion a year, but would stabilize budgets for high-poverty districts, including those facing frequent PS Page S. The analysts still recommended keeping attendance as the main driver, partly to encourage better attendance after the pandemic. But CalMatters notes that Inland Empire lawmakers and groups like the California School Boards Association are now pushing for at least partial reforms tied to climate disasters.
While those bigger funding fights play out, what are districts themselves spending to try to keep the lights on?
They are diverting money that could have gone straight into classrooms. Val Verde Unified took about $500,000 from its facilities budget to add battery storage at Orange Vista High, so at least some lights and air conditioning can run during a PS Page S. Jurupa Unified spent more than $364,000 on 2 big generators and is now paying to wire campuses so those units can be moved around. Meanwhile, Paris Elementary Superintendent Bruce Bivens told CalMatters his district simply cannot afford that kind of backup infrastructure at all.
Are there any state or federal programs helping schools with that resilience piece, or is it all on local budgets?
There is some help starting to come. The Public Utilities Commission runs a $200 million microgrid incentive program that funds community microgrids at critical sites, and CalMatters notes that a project at Malibu High School is often cited as the model. Inland Empire districts are now trying to get similar solar plus storage systems funded so their schools can essentially island when the wider grid goes down. On top of that, a statewide climate bond voters approved in 2024 and a federal Department of Energy program called Renew America's Schools are both beginning to steer money toward backup power and efficiency upgrades in disadvantaged school communities.
Stepping back, Chloe, what bigger question does this CalMatters investigation leave us with about climate, power, and education?
The story really drives home that PSPS has created a parallel crisis in public education. In trying to prevent catastrophic wildfires, California is also routinely plunging some of its poorest classrooms into literal darkness, fraying the services families depend on and deepening district debt through attendance-based funding rules. Regulators and utilities can point to strong evidence that these shutoffs, combined with grid upgrades, have lowered statewide fire risk, but the costs are falling hardest on kids who had no say in where power lines were built or how climate policy is implemented. As CalMatters and Capital Weekly's Roundup both highlight, the core question now is whether the state will treat those educational harms as a climate equity issue and redesign both the grid and school funding, so that, when the winds pick up, students in places like Paris are not always the ones left in the dark.
A complicated trade-off with really human stakes in the classroom. Reporter Chloe Martinez, thanks for breaking it down. Here are some other headlines. In Geneva this morning, the heat is on, but the hope is still alive, as the United States and Iran begin a high-stakes third round of indirect nuclear talks, with Oman again playing diplomatic middleman. Washington's team, including Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and advisor Jared Kushner, is reviewing an Iranian offer that would cap uranium enrichment at what Tehran calls a token level, in exchange for sweeping sanctions relief. All of it unfolds under the shadow of President Donald Trump's massive military buildup, including the carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, a show of force he has labeled a last-chance warning after a brief but intense 12-day conflict in June 2025. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says a deal is within reach but warns that further American escalation would ignite a devastating regional war hitting every United States base. With the International Atomic Energy Agency poised to police any pact and a 10 to 15-day White House ultimatum ticking, diplomats are racing to turn nuclear brinkmanship into brinkmanship. Off Cuba's northern coast, a speedboat sprint turned into a deadly maritime melodrama. Cuban border guards say they intercepted a Florida-registered vessel about 1 nautical mile off Villa Clara province, triggering a shootout that left 4 people dead and 6 wounded. Havana accuses 10 Cuban nationals living in the United States of attempting an armed infiltration for terrorist purposes, and says assault rifles, handguns, and Molotov cocktails were seized, with a patrol commander also injured. From a summit in St. Kitts, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio called the clash highly unusual and stressed that no American personnel were involved, as Washington scrambles to verify the identities and legal status of the dead and detained. With relations already raw after the American capture of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro in January, this firefight risks turning choppy waters into a full-blown diplomatic riptide. On Wall Street, Nvidia is not just riding the AI wave, it is printing money like a silicon mint. The chip giant reported record fourth-quarter results, with revenues soaring roughly 70+% year-over-year to well above $68 billion, and net income nearly doubling to around $43 billion. Its data center division alone hauled in more than $62 billion, as demand for AI infrastructure continues to skyrocket. Japan's Nikkei 225 index surfed that surge to crest above 59,000 points for the first time, even as United States futures slipped on fears the AI boom could morph into an AI bubble. Chief Executive Jensen Huang insisted the agentic AI inflection point has arrived, saying customers are racing to build the factories of a new AI industrial revolution. For global markets, Nvidia has become the microchip that moves the macro story, and the S&P 500's biggest question is whether this rocket can keep its liftoff. In Pyongyang, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has turned up the rhetoric to nuclear grade. Wrapping up a ruling party Congress, he branded South Korea the North's most hostile entity and a permanent enemy, and threatened to completely destroy it if he feels his regime is under threat. Kim ordered a massive expansion of his arsenal, from tactical nuclear weapons to underwater-launched intercontinental missiles, while formally abandoning the long-stated goal of peaceful reunification in favor of a nuclear-first doctrine. Yet in the same breath he dangled the prospect of better ties with Washington if the United States drops what he calls hostile policies and accepts North Korea's constitutional status as a nuclear power. Analysts say Kim is trying to cut Seoul out of the equation and dial Washington directly, turning inter-Korean relations into a one-Korea show when it comes to talks with America. And at the United Nations, the Security Council's Sudan Sanctions Committee has thrown the book, the gavel, and the rulebook at 4 top commanders of the Rapid Support Forces. Deputy Leader Abdelrahim Hamdan Daglo, North Darfur Chief Gedo Hamdan Ahmed, Brigadier General El Fattah Abdullah Idris, known as the Butcher of El Fasher, and Field Commander Tijani Ibrahim, now face a global asset freeze and travel ban. Investigators say RSF forces committed atrocities during the October 2025 capture of El Fasher in North Darfur, including ethnically targeted executions of Zaghawa civilians, mass killings at the local university, and systematic sexual violence, described as bearing the hallmarks of genocide. The move, pushed by the United States, Britain, and France, marks the toughest United Nations action since Sudan's civil war erupted in April 2023, as the country slides toward the world's worst displacement and hunger crisis. By naming names and citing videos in which Idris allegedly boasted of killing thousands, the sanctions lay down a paper trail that could one day become a courtroom trail, turning battlefield swagger into evidence on the docket. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with GPT 5.1, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.